I'm here with Rebecca Wildbear. It's really nice to meet you, Rebecca, and I'm really excited actually to talk about yoga with you. It's been quite a while since I've spoken to anyone on the podcast about yoga, but it's such an important part of my everyday life. So I'm really interested to hear about your new book, Wild Yoga, and to hear about your story. So thanks for making the time to speak with us.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. I like to start these because I'm always connecting with people all around the world. If you could just give us a sense of the place that you're at, where you live, and maybe just something of like the vibe of it, how it feels there for you.
Yeah, I'm in a tiny home actually. So you can see a little bit about it. Uh, before here, it's a pretty nice tiny home, but and I'm in Southwest Colorado. I'm actually in a little town called Mancos, Colorado, which is 30 miles southeast, southwest, mostly west of Durango, Colorado, which is more well known. It's also between Durango and Cortez, and it's right at the very tippy edge of the Four Corners area. So I could get to New Mexico, Utah, or Arizona very quickly, even though I'm right here in the corner of Colorado. And it's a lot of snow out there. Very sunny, kind of warmish day for late February. There's a really nice view. I'm not quite sure if you can see it out there. You can kind of see the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And it's we're expecting a big snowstorm this week, so that's what happens here is that there's been a lot of snow this winter, but it's very good for nature. So, and we find a way to dig ourselves out and move around.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had a very strange winter here. We had a little bit of snow just before Christmas, kind of gave us that festive holiday mood, but it's been so kind of unseasonably mild here. But we're supposed to get some kind of polar vortex this week that's maybe going to bring a cold snap and possibly some more snow. But I've just noticed over the past few years, the weather's gotten so much more unpredictable.
Yeah, we're not supposed to get that much snow in Memphis because we're near the desert.
Hmm.
So it's supposed to be that we're supposed to get less snow than most other people in Colorado, but that absolutely has not been the case this summer. We have gotten an unprecedented amount of snow, which is actually good for the rivers and nature to get a lot of moisture around here. But it's been an unusual winter.
Hmm. Well, I'd love to hear your journey that brought you to yoga. I always find that it brings a really interesting story and really tells something about the person. So I wonder if we could start there, if you could talk about what led you to yoga.
Yeah, I did my first yoga class when I had cancer, and I was I had been uh, editor of the college newspaper, resident assistant, leadership of lots of things, A student, kind of having the full on college experience, and like most young people feeling superhuman, involved in environmental action and politics, and I discovered that, like the cancer made me slow down and stop. I had to give up doing a lot of things and go very inward. I was also a philosophy, religious studies major. So I was very into like listening to God or my purpose or a higher being or something. I was questioning, what that was at that time. I didn't really know. I was pretty into mysticism. That was the closest connection I could find. And then eventually nature, what I would call nature mysticism. That was the deepest connection I could personally find. But I was trying out different practices at that time. And when I got cancer, it really it kind of put a crunch on, it made me slow down. And that is kind of what made me go to yoga because I was like, well, I need to be healthy. And I'd always been into sports. I played basketball in high school and I played soccer and softball. So I always had liked being physical and was quite good at it. But yoga was something quite different. And I discovered that in the first class. I had just been for a section biopsy surgery 4 weeks earlier. So it was actually painful on my body. And I know a lot of people say that. My yoga teacher said his first yoga class was painful. And mine was too. And it's also humbling. Like sports I could feel good at, but yoga, I was like, whoa, I don't bend or Ow, this
Hmm.
hurts. So I actually didn't go back to a yoga class for a while after my first one, um, probably about 8 years. In my late 20s, I just knew I needed to do yoga again. I still again was very active backpacking and mountain biking, mostly outdoor sports at that point, rock climbing. And as you get a little older, even late 20s, your body gets tighter. And I just knew yoga was like where I should go. So I started going to a weekly yoga class in my remote West Virginia community. And then it was soon after that that I knew I needed like a full on immersion, that like once a week wasn't going to quite cut it, because I lived in remote places and I wanted to be able to do yoga on my own and not always need to go to a class. So I just decided
Hmm.
I needed to do a yoga teacher training. So that was the first time I ever went to Costa Rica. I subscribed to Yoga Journal and I studied different places to see which one might be the right place for me to go for the yoga teacher training. And I dreamed about it for many years before I actually went. But
Yeah,
I went, and that was where I studied yoga teacher training. So that was the beginning of my journey.
cool. So what era was this? Like, because like there was a huge yoga boom in the 90s, and like was it around that time? Because I can't imagine West Virginia being like a yoga hotbed.
Right. It was actually in early 2000. I'm a little older than I look. It was in early 2000, like around 2001, when I was going to the yoga class in West Virginia. When I did yoga in my college, it was 1994. And at that
Hmm.
point, it was still very rare. That's kind of why I'd never been exposed to yoga when I was younger. And it hadn't been at our college before. Generally, it wasn't like a thing. And then somebody had just brought it to the college, and I was there like with a very small group of people just beginning to try it out.
Yeah. I mean, my first experiences of yoga were in like the basement of a community center with this tall Dutchman who had gone to India and studied with Iyengar. But there was no yoga studios at that time in the 90s in kind of the smaller city that I grew up in. And so it's a very kind of weird underground, like literally underground, because it was in the basement of a community center, um, but outsider kind of thing. Um, and that was part of the draw for me, was that it was this kind of strange esoteric practice, and I didn't understand it. It was painful because it was like Iyengar yoga, so it was all about getting the posture correct and
Mm.
pushing your body and that kind of thing. What kind of yoga did you experience in West Virginia at the time? And who was the teacher? Like, who's the weirdo who brought yoga to West Virginia?
I'm not even sure exactly what kind of class we were doing then. It was pretty basic. It wasn't a vinyasa flow necessarily. It was just moving into different postures and trying them out. So I think I'd say hatha yoga would be my best guess, just a basic general hatha yoga. It didn't seem strict like Iyengar. I've studied Iyengar too in later years and all sorts of other different types, but it seemed like a basic hatha yoga course. And then when I went to study in Costa Rica for what I would call my main yoga that I studied lots of branches that included in my yoga, but my teachers in Costa Rica, Don and Amba Stapleton, they became my main teachers. They were the first ones I went to yoga teacher training with, and then I went and continued and ended up doing like 1,000 hours of training with them and assisting them in many yoga trainings as an assistant yoga teacher training over many years. So I became pretty steeped in their style and their philosophy, and it really meshed with my beliefs and the other kinds of spiritual and soul work that I was doing
Hmm.
too, and body work and meditation. But theirs was based from Kripalu. My teachers, Don and Amba, had lived at the ashram back with a guru. And in fact, Don Stapleton had been one of the senior teachers there. And they were there. He
Right.
had been there for like 20 years, and Amba had been there for 6. And then she'd moved out to California to do her own thing a little bit. And eventually, right after the guru fell because of some sex scandals,
Right.
um,
Amrit Desai, right?
that's correct. That's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. I
Then
remember that.
Don and Amba then went down to Costa Rica and did their own thing and created their own center. And Don actually was having some back troubles, some pretty bad back troubles, and chiropractic wasn't helping him. And so through that, he discovered his own kind of yoga, which she has a book on called Self-Awakening Yoga. And it's actually a kind of yoga that's good for anyone. Like sometimes people associate yoga with, only you have to be strong and, really in shape to do it and nobody else can do it. So his yoga, Self-Awakening Yoga, is actually made for anyone, like absolutely anyone can do it. And in fact, it's good for anyone's kind of body to do it because you're really listening to your own body as you can. And there's all sorts of options and variations. It mixes like some Feldenkrais in and some movement inquiries. And so it's and Amba came from a more vinyasa Kripalu style background, and she was a bit more like hardcore vinyasa. So they would mix between the two of them, we would get hardcore vinyasa, and then we would also get very gentle movement inquiries. And that's the main background that I come from, and I spent a lot of time there, and I love it because Don was an art professor, so he was very into empowering people to find their creativity and also kind of getting in the body as a way of lining with your muse and your creativity. I did a program with them called Inner Quest, and that was a lot about going on a quest in your body and inquiry in your body to find your creativity. So they supported my wild yoga, and I did some wild yoga at their center, and they're the ones that encouraged me at first to trademark it. They said, you better do it. There's so many problems in the yoga world. And so I did, and started doing programs through there. And then I also work at another organization called Animas Valley Institute. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but I've worked there.
Yeah, I've had Bill on the podcast.
Oh, great. Great. Yeah. So I've worked there. I started studying with Bill. My first Animas program was when I was 29. So that was 20 years ago, like just over 20 years ago. And so then I studied for 6 years in their guide training program and became a guide. So I've been a guide and either a guide or studying with them for the last 2 decades. And a lot of that soul work is also incorporated into my yoga. And I found a way that what Don and Amba taught me and what I learned at Animas really, they work together in a lot of ways for evoking my own creativity and my own muse through listening to my body, dreams, the earth, and then bringing that into the yoga. And that's some of my background.
Don Stapleton rings a bell. Is it Nosara where they had a yoga center?
Yeah, Nosara Yoga Institute. Now their website says Self-Awakening Yoga, but originally it was because they physically have moved out of Nosara. But
I remember they sold the center a few years back.
They did.
I remember kind of dreaming about buying it with my wife.
It's a beautiful place. I love Nosara. It's definitely getting more and more developed. Not quite. Yeah. When I first went there 20 years ago, it was a very wildernessy area, and Don and Amba and one restaurant and hotel were about the only things there. And that was a really wonderful time. And it's got and the beaches are gorgeous, which is why it's become one reason why it's become more and more popular.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. So I can't blame people for wanting to move there. But yeah, it has changed quite a bit since we visited, like 15 or so years ago. It's one of the first places we went when my wife and I first got together. And we totally fell in love with Costa Rica. And it was starting to change. You could start to see some of that development really affect the locality. And yeah, it's only gotten more pronounced, I think. So what was like the seed of wild yoga? You're studying with these teachers who you really love, and you're loving what they're offering. What was it that formulated in you that said, there's something different that wants to come through me, and it's called wild yoga? Like, I'm really interested in the genesis of that, like where you start to deviate from your teachers or incorporate other things. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's great. I think some of it was during an Inner Quest class when we were called to go in and find like our own creative muse through our body. And then also just my own time on the beaches and in the wilderness areas, which, like I said, at that time were still quite wild. There's a section I write about in my first book in chapter 1 about my conversation in the tide pools of the Costa Rica. It's actually one of my favorite places in the world, those tide pools. And I was in them where I feel there's a very big resonance between those tide pools and also some of my mythopoetic visions that have come of the mythopoetic place I'm to occupy that has to do with a cave pool. And tide pool feels a lot like the cave pool to me in my mythos. So it feels like almost like a portal to me, otherworldly, where things happen. And I spend a lot of time in there listening, sometimes just sitting and looking around, sometimes looking under the water at the fish. And sometimes at this time, there was hardly any people there. In fact, on this particular day, I'll tell you about, I was the only one on the whole beach in that section. It wasn't a main entrance or anything. I was alone. And I just started having a conversation with the tide pool and doing kind of yoga poses in the water, like arm balances and handstands in particular, because it's sort of fun to do them in water, and the sand bottom is sandy, and you could fall. And so I would be in shallow water doing like the arm balances, and then in deeper water trying the handstands. And then I started moving onto the rocks and trying balancing poses on the rocks with the waves crashing in, the rocks that surrounded the tide pool and were keeping them in. And I also went into the waves, and I had a particular yoga with them as well, like where I it's one of my favorite yogas. It's like where I lie down and like perpendicular to the wave, and I'm just about an inch beneath the surface, and I let the wave kind of roll over me. I definitely exhale when the wave's coming over, so no water goes up my nose, but you just kind of feel the whole energy of the wave and in its different stages, and some different other things that and you know, body surfing in the waves too, and then also postures on the sand. So I started, and then back to the tide pool again, and I called it like a vinyasa, or a movement flow, you know, where I was just flowing and communing. And part of it was listening to the land and asking the land, telling the land, I love you, and what can I bring to you, or what can I do for you? What can I offer you? What do I have to offer, you know, such beauty as you are? And my body just started to go into these rhythms, just like in my classes in yoga. You know, Don emphasizes a lot, it's how he studied with his guru, this spontaneous movements of the body. It's like when you just let the body go and do what it feels called to do, when it's like in that flow. And that's kind of what was happening for me, but in nature, as I was in conversation with this place and with this land about what I could offer. And of course, when it was all over, you know, I heard nature say, this is something you need to bring this to the world. This is something important. And of course, you know how easy it is to dismiss ourselves. And I said, no, this is just, I'm just playing around. This isn't really, nobody else would be interested in it.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? No, like I feel amazing. This is so cool, but like no one else is going to get this or be interested. Like it's so weird. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
So I was having this conversation, and kind of nature, the conversation I was having with nature, they wouldn't let me leave until they're like, no, you have to promise that next year you're going to do wild yoga program in Costa Rica. You have to promise, you have to ask your teachers, you have to tell them, you have to try. And, you know, of course, I didn't think it would happen, and I didn't even think my teachers would agree. So I just said yes. I said, okay, I promise that I'll do my part to try. And my teachers said yes pretty quickly. And so the next year I did make a flyer and I posted it, but I was so embarrassed. I didn't advertise it. I sent not one email. I wasn't on Facebook at that time. I sent it out to no one. So it was like,
it's like maybe if I don't advertise it, no one will notice, and they'll never have the chance to like fail spectacularly at this thing.
Exactly. So you know, I was just thinking it was going to get canceled, but in the end, 2 people signed up for it anyway. And
God, yeah, I've had that happen
anyway. And
where then you're accountable, right? Then you've got to follow through.
And my teachers were fine with me doing it. They had a little yoga hut that I could do it in that was away from their main hall. And so I ended up, it was really the perfect way to start, because I got to do it with 2 people, and it wasn't too overwhelming for me. And I could explore what I wanted to do with these people and get a lot of feedback and offer them a lot. So then after that, it was something I began doing every year and more, and then ultimately writing a book about.
Great. So I can totally relate, by the way. And I think it's such a kind of blessing that new yoga teachers could embrace when you're not well known, you don't have a big following, and like 1 or 2 people show up at your class. I think often they'll think like, oh my God, this sucks. How can I do this? It's like, but like, that's the opportunity for you to really test things out with people and get that feedback, because there's not a big group that you're attending to, right? And so it's like quite a blessing. to develop something new. So when those two people show up, are you taking them to the tide pools and doing all the stuff you were doing on your own with them and seeing what their response was?
Oh yeah, we did that and so much more because I had a whole week with them. But yeah, we did yoga in a studio where I start to create movement flows that are about bringing nature in, that are variations actually of some of the self-awakening poses, but with a lot of nature imagery. And so I'm creating my own kind of yoga in person that brings those elements of nature in, even that can be done in a studio with poetry and music. And then we're also going out to the beach and different places in nature. And we're doing tree yoga and we're doing tide pool yoga and we're doing ocean yoga and finding out how yoga in relationship with nature in our bodies, how that what unfolds for them.
Hmm. Wonderful. So that was what, back in like 2006, thereabouts, right?
I think so. That sounds about right. Yeah, that would sound about right.
And so how did it proceed from there? Did you keep offering that program at the Nosara school, or were you starting to branch out more already? How did that happen?
I think I offered it for another year. I think I offered it for another couple of years at Nasara Yoga Institute. And got more people and so began to explore it more. But the thing is, I'm used to guiding programs in really remote natural places where there's a lot of places, because a big part of my offerings too for people are wandering in nature and having conversations with the land. And Nasara was getting more and more crowded. So I found it hard to give people the nature immersion I wanted in that location. Although we still had a great experience because the beaches are still very powerful. But I started to move and try it in other more remote places. There's a eco lodge that I was a yoga teacher at for several winters that's very, very remote, in Punta Benco, one of the more remote places that exist in Costa Rica. I did it 1 year there. And then I did it several years on the Osa Peninsula, which is also very wild near Corcovado National Park. So I just, I branched out into wilder places. And then I also started doing it in the United States too. Sometimes I would do shorter programs in wilderness places, and I became a river guide, which I also find is a kind of yoga. It's very physical and it also involves water a lot, and something here in Colorado that doesn't have the ocean. It was a way to be with the ocean and the water systems of the world. So I trained to be a river guide and I started doing wild yoga on the river trips, which allowed people to still have conversations, like a really physical conversation with the land and their bodies and their yoga.
Well, and yeah, I can see that because something like river rafting, because of the danger element, kind of like surfing, like it forces you to be present. Because as soon as you're not present, it's like that Zen teacher coming around and whacking you with a stick. Like nature's going to slap you upside the head and say, like, pay attention, right? And there's consequences.
And there's just such a finesse to getting to know a river, because sometimes it's flat and calm and you're just floating and looking up at canyon walls, and then sometimes it's rushing and you're like moving through rapids really quickly. And when you're in a boat and you're moving through water that way, you're really getting to actually feel like the river itself, which is part of being able to have a conversation with nature, is really being able to make ourselves vulnerable and open enough to feel like they feel, to feel what they would feel, and to learn their wisdom and what it's like to be them by being with them and becoming so close to them.
Right. And I would imagine that also seeing our lives, like the rhythm and flow of our lives reflected in the rhythm and flow of a river, making that really tangibly felt. Like sometimes there's moments where you're not moving anywhere, it's very still. But then other times you're caught up in the rapids and you're being like thrust along life, or you're, being thrown up against the rocks and all of that. Like it's such a great kind of, tactile, visceral metaphor for your life, right?
Yeah, one of my favorite metaphors is sometimes you're upright on the river and then in a sudden instant you're out of the boat or the raft is flipped, and it's just the stark reality behind difference in those movements, in those moments, and rewriting yourself. And to me, I'd say rivers have taught me a lot about dancing in the tumultuous currents of my life, and sometimes when you're flipped or knocked out, not to freak out, but to just keep swimming and get back on the boat, to like, be in that moment. That happens. The boat flips sometimes, or you pop out.
Yeah, and I guess that's where like the yoga would come in, is like how to maintain some level of equanimity in those differing situations. Like, when it's really calm and placid, like are you getting bored? Are you kind of like unsatisfied that nothing's happening, right? And when it's getting like wild and crazy, are you able to kind of keep your cool and, like you said, stay in the boat or get back in the boat and keep paddling? That seems to me like really the essence of what yoga is meant to help us with, right?
It is. It is. I've never really liked flipping or being out of the boat, just to be honest. I like,
Sure.
in some trips you can stay, certain trips you can stay in the boat. And in fact, I've guided in companies just like stay in the boat, stay in the boat. That's the number one rule, and what you tell people. But I did a training on the Zambezi River in in Zambia, and they had a different philosophy, which was that we're going to flip because that's just the way it is. And sooner we get used to flipping, the better. And they actively flip a lot of times. And so I did that training, and in very big water, which I'm definitely more afraid of, like huge water, even though a lot of times huge water is safer than less water. It's less rocky for the most part. But it's still very, very scary because it's so powerful. The currents are so powerful. So I did a training there to try to learn that, what I was hoping to teach, to be able to be okay with being underwater, being out of the boat, learning to get back in. And that helped me a lot.
Yeah. How was it for you? This is something that I've struggled with over the years. Like, do I create my own yoga brand that has its own kind of unique language and things like that? Because for me, I was also drawing a lot of inspiration from nature and could see that at the roots of yoga, that was there. And I was really just trying to draw out more of what I felt was like really core to the roots of yoga, is this like nature connection, and I would call it shamanic yoga. It was helping us get into a state where we could really venture into the imaginal realm and go on like a soul journey. Like that for me was what yoga was helping me to achieve. I wasn't trying to go for stillness of mind or anything like that, like a restraint of the mind. It was more making the mind placid so that something from the depths could come up and be seen and experienced. So it felt like a little different than what I was getting in, from my teachers, but also in other yoga classes. I never felt that other people were putting a focus on that. So I experimented with, branding it something. But it's always been a difficult thing for me because I don't want to claim anything of yoga and say I'm doing something new. But I also felt the need to distinguish what I was doing from what was out there in the marketplace already. So I'm just wondering, like, how that was for you, like coming up with this idea. It's wild yoga, and your teacher's saying, you should brand it. You should like really claim that. And you've been doing it for a while. So I'm just interested to hear from you. If that's always been kind of an easy journey for you, if it's something you've struggled with, questions of appropriation, any of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say it is something I've probably struggled with, and it's taken a long time. I've been doing it for a long time before I wrote the book. And I've been pretty happy as a guide with Animas Valley Institute as well, guiding those programs already created by Bill Plotkin. And I was pretty happy also with my yoga teachers, although they have finished, doing what they do. But some of my other friends and colleagues, my friend runs Nexus Yoga Institute down there now in Nasara. And so she's carrying on a lot of what Don and Amba did, at least some of it. So I don't know, like I was just trying to find, what am I bringing that's different? And is it, because I could keep doing, the same things. Is what I'm doing or creating, is it valuable enough to really make it into something? And I also started to become an earth activist and care about the planet and care about, you know, doing my part to try to help stop ecocide and the destructions of lands and species. And then amidst that too, I could see how easy it is to get burned out and not be able to do it. And so a lot of wild yoga became this balance between, I've also seen a little bit of a rift in the field between personal growth and activism. You know, there's people that do the work to quote, you know, help the world, save the world, like try to make a difference for land and species and animals. And then there's people that do personal work and just go into the imagination in their bodies and, you know, wait, and there's no action. And I feel like there's a kind of a disconnect there. And sometimes one world views the other world as the place to be. And I felt called by my soul to actually bring together this rift a little bit, and show that they're actually both valuable. So wild yoga, it kind of goes back to the roots of yoga, which isn't just about yoga asana, but it's about who we are and what is our relationship to everything in the world. Mm-hmm. And as Amy Ippoliti is one of my yoga teachers too. I studied with her a bit, and she put a quote on my an endorsement on my book, and she said it great. Originally, nature yoga used to always be about being with nature, and it's only when civilization became disconnected from nature that yoga became disconnected from nature. And she was saying, you know, my book is, you know, I'm bringing it back to its foundational roots, which the poses are named after animals. So it's about getting into our wild bodies. And so I felt like, in some ways, I guess wild yoga to me is my form of activism in a way. It's like, oh yeah, speak, act, like this is valuable. It's different enough from what Bill is offering, from what my teachers are offering, from what other people are doing. There's something here that if you do it, if you put it out there, it could make a difference. I wanted to make wild yoga simple language, because sometimes spiritual books can seem over people's heads and not tangible or graspable enough. And I wanted to make a language simple enough that anyone could get it, that anyone could relate to it if they were willing to, you know, listen to it or try. The language would be simple. And I wanted to make the poses inviting and simple, so again, that everyone could be invited in. And, you know, a lot of times people can't, quote, afford to go on yoga retreats, you know. So I wanted to make a book that was accessible, that allowed people to have the same sort of things that I was teaching that were unique, but to be able to get it in a book. So those are some of all of the pieces that inspired me. And I would say, I guess, of all of those, the biggest one was probably my love of the planet and feeling that this might be my way in, my particular way that could make a difference enough to open people, if I open people again to their hearts and their bodies and listening to the earth, that maybe that is a way that could make a difference or change the world.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I'm so with you on all of that. I just I put out a post today because I got a reminder that 7 years ago today I released my first book, which is called Harmonic Movement, which the intention behind it was exactly what you're talking about, how to bring in some like really evocative language into yoga, not stay away from any jargon, no Sanskrit, try to give people the straight goods so that they could have the experience wherever they are, and keeping it quite simple actually. But for me, the simplicity allows for a greater depth in a lot of ways. It's like, and I also really agree with you that through something like the practice of yoga that is about connecting to nature, which, like you said, is that was the way, that was the Tantra. The way to connect through the divine wasn't to get out of the body and everything. It was to make that communion with nature, to be a tree for 10 breaths. I mean, what a profound experience to be like a dog rolling around on its back or stretching after a nap. Like, this is the essence of yoga, is to have that experience of union with the non-human or other than human natural world, so that we can remember that we are that. And I think if we can awaken that in people, then the activism just becomes like a natural outflow from that experience, because you fall back in love with the world, right? And if you love something, you want to care for it and you want to protect it. um, you want everyone to enjoy it, like us with our yoga. It's like, I want everybody to have this experience. It's amazing. And it changed my life. So wow, I really feel like we're kindred spirits in this. And I would love to hear a little bit about this. Okay, so Bill, for people who don't know Bill's work, I had him on the podcast a while back, and one of the things we talked about, which was a new idea to me, but not a new experience for me, but he put a name to something that I'd experienced, and he calls it discovering your mythopoetic identity. And as soon as he said it, I was like, oh, yeah, I know what mine is. And I have a story, how it came to me and all of that. And it's a really special thing. It's like a guiding myth for my life in terms of what my role in this ecosystem is, what my, I think Bill calls it the ecological niche, because nature doesn't make waste. Everything has a purpose. We're the only ones who are trying to find it. The bumblebee has no problem finding his niche, the birds, the squirrels, everybody else. So humans are in this unique predicament of like wondering what our purpose is in all of this. So you mentioned earlier that you had found this. So I'd love to hear that story of how you discovered your mythopoetic identity, if you're comfortable sharing it, because I know for me it feels a little bit personal and private sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. That's a big part of my wild yoga book. In you know, pieces of my story are written throughout the book because I would say my mythopoetic identity, which it often does. Sometimes it doesn't just come in one moment. It keeps coming over years or over time. In fact, I never call it really done. If I say it's done, I might put the cap on. More important information coming.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say there's some pieces of it I think it's in chapter 2. I tell the story of my first vision quest and seeking like my purpose in that, and the name Braveheart that came to me. And I tell the whole story of it, but certainly that was at the very beginning, and I wasn't used to nature speaking back to me in any way. I talked to nature, sure, but I didn't really know that I heard much back, which is often the case, and it takes a little while sometimes to really hear. But I was fasting too, so my mind and my brain was altering, and that's the whole point of fasting. It is to kind of weaken the ego in our everyday of relating and alter us so that we can hear things that we might not otherwise hear. And so on the third day, I had a bit of a meltdown where I felt like I was dying because I was hiking back up this huge hill after putting a stone on my buddy pile. And I had cancer when I was 21, and I was 29 when I did the quest. So it was reminding me of like my near-death experience with cancer, as I was feeling like my heart bounding and like I could hardly walk up the hill. And I thought, oh my God, what if I'm going to die out here? And then that opening was when I got back up on the rock, and I had been asking, what is my name, the whole time, every day, but I wasn't getting, too much of an answer. But then suddenly an answer came through, and it was like a vision. So immediately the word Braveheart, it sent this vision into my mind, and all these flashes of memories of times I was brave and how I had felt in those moments, and then times that I had failed to do so. And the pain of that, turning away. And so I said, no, that's a movie, but it was too late. It was too late that those visions had already come through me. And
it's taken by Mel Gibson. It can't be mine. It sounds ridiculous if I say it.
So it took me still 6 months after that quest to accept the name. I had to get up in the middle of the night, crying and writing poetry, and start to feel my heart opening and unraveling, to begin to realize that, okay, I get it. This is the name, and to even begin to start to discover what it means. So that was one of my first glimmers of soul, but there was more as well, throughout. Some years later, there was a mythic image of a tree. Trees, for many years, I wrote chapter 5 is all about my relationship with trees, or at least some glimmers into my relationship with trees. But trees were a very big part for me of my soul's journey, talking with them, being nurtured by them, even being lovers with them, and ultimately finding out that mythically I am in part a tree with wings and fruit and and a cave pool underneath that goes way down and cracked open to the heart of the world and opening to an underground river that and there's a bear involved too in that, and that's a story I tell in chapter 4. So I think of our soul story as a whole cosmology, and my book tells a lot of pieces of mine, but it doesn't even tell everything because it's so big that it's bigger even than me. It's even bigger, I think, than I can put words to as a full story, because I'm sort of like in the dream of it, and I keep uncovering pieces of the dream of it and learning more and more as we go. But one of the names I go by mythically is Bravehearted, which was that first vision I told you about. Bravehearted, a wild love prayer bear who lives in the dark waters, a witness to horror and beauty. So that's what I feel like my call or part of my personal cosmology is.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I think it's so important for us as well, a lot of us, I feel, are like spiritual orphans. You know, we've been disconnected from our family lineages, spiritual traditions. A lot of people have become disillusioned with the organized religions. And we're seeking, I think, a cosmology, like a coherent story of the world that has us in it, you know? And so I think it's been important to me. Something that arose spontaneously was this cosmology, a story I could tell. And I remember the morning it came to me like really clear. And I just wrote it down it came out like a story, like a creation story. They had me in it and had something to do with my purpose and explained why the hell I was here and born in this particular circumstance, you know, in this crazy family, and gone through all the trouble I've gone through. And I've never thought about like how to like help someone come to their own mythopoetic story, or that to find that cosmology, to, you know, the story to live by. Like Carl Jung, I think, said at one point that it was the most important thing is for us to discover the myth that we're living. And I think that's something to do with what you're talking about, right? So how do you help people find theirs? And do you agree that it's like so essentially important?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's essential, and particularly I think it's essential if you're called to it. I do know people. I think it's great. We work at Animas a lot with soul and wholeness, and one of the things I think Bill has said that I've taken is if the whole world could be whole and intact, meaning like ecocentric, like where they cared about the world would be completely different, even if they didn't know their soul. So I don't like to, quote, force anyone like, oh my God, everybody's got to know their mythos or their soul. But I do believe that people who are called to it, who are allured by it, it's almost like you can't not go for it. You can't not listen for it. There's no other option. It almost can feel like nothing else is worth doing. I can't focus on this or that. I don't, the dominant culture, what's going on in the world. It's like, this is so important. Like my attention needs to go to that. And that's when it's like that, when you have that pull to the soul's journey, like absolutely, it's important. And it does take time, needs to be taking time out for it. It can sometimes feel like you're going a little crazy or doing something a little strange, but it's definitely well worth the journey. And I help people attune to that a lot by listening to their dreams. Dreams are a really big key. Our dream life is when our mind is shut off and we're just listening to, like, I would say maybe the Earth's imagination or the dream time, and allowing these images to come through. And a lot of times when you do personal work with people, it can be about allowing the ego to guide you. Like, what do I want? What makes me feel better? And those can be great questions. But if we're trying to root ourselves in soul or in the dream of the earth, then we're actually it's a lot about listening. And dreams are a big way you listen. Another way is the body. I think of the body a lot like a dream. Whatever physical symptoms or pain, I had my whole cancer experience, which was a big part of my journey. whatever's happening in our body, whatever we're feeling, we can tune into the dream of that. And that's why yoga and movement and things like that can help us get into listening to that in a dream, like it is a mystic, like the mysticism of our body. I
Hmm.
have a practice I call listening to the mystery in the body. And then another big piece is listening to nature and making ourselves vulnerable to nature. That's why I lead quests and I take people out on extended experiences in nature. So they either go on wanders for a few hours or quests overnight for several days. But either way, whether it's a short time or a long time, they're going out into nature with the intent on listening. It's almost dreamlike too. We call it the deep imagination. So it's kind of like where you're in a creative flow in nature and things kind of come up unbidden when you don't
Hmm.
try to make them, but you also ask your biggest questions, you share your biggest feelings. So those windows of listening, I would say, would be there's others, but I would say those, to me, those three are at the top of the list for how do I help people listen for their souls.
Yeah. Listening to the dreams, listening to the body, listening to nature, listening to everything in nature. Like your body in nature is different than it is in your home or your office, right? And so even noticing that difference or what awakens in you that's different when you're out in nature for a good amount of time.
Mhm.
Uh, have you ever checked out the work of Arnold Mindell? He's done some work around the dream body.
I have. It's been like more than a decade, but I did read him probably in my early 30s and was
Yeah.
interested by what he was up to.
Yeah, he's done some interesting stuff over the years. Well, this is amazing. I just love hearing all of this. And it sounds like maybe the Animas Valley has been a good affiliation for you in terms of being a practitioner and guide and teacher. Um, how did you discover them and how did you get started? And what was the journey to becoming a guide with them?
I was a wilderness guide. I'd worked for Outward Bound and I'd worked as a school counselor. I had a master's in counseling. And then I moved into the field of wilderness therapy, working with troubled teens and sometimes young adults who were sent to the wilderness for recovery. And so I had thought, wow, this is great. I get to work out in the wilderness. That's exactly what I want to do. But after a couple of years of that, I realized that there was something missing still, something that felt huge. Because still the way that people engaged with nature, myself and others where we worked, it felt like nature was this backdrop and almost like, well, we were using nature for human healing, but it felt
Mhm.
like I was remembering back to stories of indigenous peoples and the way they commune with the land. And so that's the way that I felt a longing to commune. And I found a brochure, and I was thinking, gosh, do I need to go to get a PhD in eco-psychology or what do I need to do? And amidst that searching, I found Animas Valley Institute, and then they came out to do a program. It's one of the first times I ever went to a personal growth workshop outside of just like what's required, by your job. And it was a few hours away in Virginia. I lived in West Virginia. And so I went to a Soulcraft intensive. It actually was their first one that they ever did on the East Coast. They did Quest, but they had never done a Soulcraft intensive. And so it was like, somehow it was perfect. Like conversations across the species border, dream work, ceremony. I just couldn't believe the world that I'd stumbled into. And suddenly what I saw there made everything that I was doing in my wilderness therapy look so much less and
Mhm.
not really where I wanted to be. So within 6 months, I did a vision quest with Animas and I moved out west to Utah. And then 6 months after my quest, I signed up for the guide training program and I started for 6 years, did the guide training program and was just immersed. I mean, I did wilderness therapy still as my day job, to make a living. And then I used all of my vacation time and everything else to just study those courses so that I could become a guide. And then for a while, when I became a guide, I still only guided a few programs a year. And so I still kept my wilderness therapy job. And I would go to Costa Rica in the winter and study with my teachers yoga. And then I would do wilderness therapy in the summer. And then I would do animus programs amidst that all. And then eventually I was able to just leave my wilderness therapy job. Actually, Don Stapleton had a bit to do with that. He invited me to guide a program in Nassau in August when I was supposed to be doing wilderness therapy. And I realized I wanted to go do that. And you're not supposed to take that much time off in the summer when wilderness therapy. So I just realized I just had to quit. So I did. And then I just gave myself full time to my Animas programs, my wild yoga programs, my personal guiding sessions that I do with people on my own listening.
Wow. That's inspiring to me, as a kind of fellow practitioner, but often I felt like I've never had a place to belong because I find there's very few kind of organizations that have such a deep orientation to soul and imagination and the wild. Maybe one or two of those things, but very few embrace all of them and make them so central. So I'm intrigued again to maybe dig into Animas's offerings. I know there's not a lot happening up here in Canada, so I wonder if they need some kind of affiliate partner up here or something.
Yeah,
We'll see.
I think they do some. They've been doing some programs up there. I haven't been up there myself in a while, some years since before COVID, but I believe my colleague Doug and some others came to. A lot of times they go to Vancouver Island, not, and there hasn't been as much in the Pacific Northwest. There is a couple guides up there though, and Bill and Janine just moved up to Washington State, so. I
Oh,
would
really?
I imagine that might be changing in the future, that there might be more offerings that they're doing up that way.
Maybe there's something meant to be there. Well, that's really intriguing. Let's just leave it at that. I know people over the years have kept pointing me to Animas and said, look, with everything you're doing, like these are your guys, like these are your people over here. They're doing the same thing, but there's like a network and there's support there and, structure that can help you and all of that. And I'm such a kind of lone wolf. Like that's part of my mythopoetic identity is the lone wolf. But as I get older,
I think it's a reasonable thing, and I just want to say, belonging to me sometimes is about having some of the same core values, maybe not even all of the same core values, but some of the same core values like that you really that are around your purpose. But there can be a lot of tumultuous, there can be a lot to deal with in relationships in order to, make it work. And sometimes, in fact, having to work with people that, that there's struggles with. And so I can understand that. And I kind of have the pull. I'm a bit of a hermit too. So I have the both and, like the pull to be, that hermit with the muse, with my own muse and true to my own muse. And then also to dance in relationship and try to give and receive and be together and commune. But there's challenges in both ends, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially as I get older, like I'm getting close to 50 now, I'm starting to feel more capacity for that dance with other and with more structure. And I know that that's a place where I felt a lot of growth, like coming into those situations and having to get along and having to compromise and all of that has been really helpful to me. Like it's really easy for me to be a lone wolf and a hermit and the yogi in the cave. That's easy for me. I'm really happy there. But something keeps drawing me out into the world, into seeking collaboration and running up against all of the difficulties I have for a reason. Part of my story is that my soul's here to learn some of those lessons. And if I don't learn them now, it's going to be, next time around. Well,
Great.
Rebecca,
It's great to take that pull.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think if we don't listen to the call of our soul, we do so at our own peril.
It's true. It really can feel like there's just no other choice. That's usually soul checkmates us.
I like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sooner or later, she's going to grab you by the hair and drag you along.
That's how it has felt in my life. And there's a lot of joy that comes in that. And then there's also a large sense of responsibility. The ego isn't totally choosing their life anymore. Because what really
Yeah.
feels good isn't like all those whatever things that are like about making the ego feel good. It's
Yeah, the ego gratification and puffing up the ego. It's usually like the idea, like Jung said, that any encounter with the numinous, with the more than human, is always experienced as a defeat for the ego.
Mhm,
And I've just found that to be true. And so it's a good sign for me. If my ego feels defeated or deflated, that's probably good for my soul, actually. So who am I serving here, right?
mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, exactly. That, and I'm sure from talking to Bill, to be soul initiated is to live for your soul, to live married to your soul, where the ego lives to serve the vision of.
Mhm. And I think the another important part of that is when you're a servant to soul, it's not just like quote unquote my individual soul, but recognizing that that soul is completely interconnected and interdependent with the anima mundi, with the soul of the world. Um, there just happens to be a little piece of that contained in this form, in this body, with this personality and everything else associated with it. But it's much larger than little me.
Totally. Exactly. I mean, just as an example, I don't know whether I would have chosen a public life or doing a lot of talks, because I'm actually rather shy, and would have might maybe just chose to stay out in nature and just be sort of like, kind of hidden, behind the
Yeah.
trees. But Soul, my muse said, write this book, and now, it's out in the world, front or stage, with, really personal stories of my life. So that's just one example of, living in service to soul takes us to all sorts of places that our ego might not have chosen those same paths.
Yeah, I totally hear you. It's not my natural inclination to broadcast conversations with people to the public and all that, but I can't stop doing it. Every time I think I've had enough and like I'm kind of sick of like experts and authorities and like, oh God. And I'm like doing this public service and not getting a whole lot back. And I'm like, okay, I'm done with it. I might take a little break, but something drags me back in, And so I'm just following it. Yeah, I'm just following it. And I'm trying to serve it, trusting that it's for some greater good. And so you've got the book out now, and you've got to kind of serve the book in a way. And so you've got to have these conversations, and you've got to like get out there and kind of tell people about it. And I'm sure that's not yeah, exactly what you'd signed up for, but it's part of it, I guess, right?
It is. I mean, if I believe in what I wrote, which I do, is a helpful thing, then the best way to help it reach people is to be on talks and share about it. But it's kind of, I'm a guide, so it's not like that took a while to stand in front of a group of 10 or 12 people, and but I've done that now for 20 years, so I'm a little bit more comfortable. But all those people's faces I can see, and I can speak or not speak and respond to what I'm seeing. But in writing a book and in public speaking, you're just speaking in to whoever's listening, and you don't quite know if it's landing or the response. And so it's a different medium that I'm just getting used to.
Mm. Yeah, I found for me, it's just about having this conversation. So thinking about the person in front of me and just trying to be open and curious, not thinking so much about, what the publisher wants us to talk about and all of that. It's like, no, I want to just have like a real conversation with this person I get to spend time with. And then part of me paying back what I feel is the gift of that, because it's a real honor to talk to you guys. You get this invitation from this guy you've never met, and you show up and you give me an hour and a half of your time. And I appreciate when people like you show up and have like a real conversation. You're not just giving me the byline of the book, you're not reading me the back cover. We're having an actual conversation and you're going with the flow. And so we're in it together. And then I feel like, well, we've had like the benefit and the gift of that experience. Got to share it, right? Because it's not just for us. So that helps guide me in a way. It's just like showing up, having a real conversation with somebody, and then kind of, the old yoga idea of like letting go of the outcomes, just focusing on your task at hand, and forgetting about like the fruits of your labor. Just do the labor, do the work. And so for me, this is the work and a way to serve soul and the soul of the world. So thanks for being a co-conspirator in that.
Yeah, thanks for playing, and
Yeah, it
playing.
is play.
hmm
So how can people find out more about you and your offerings? What's the best place for them to do that?
I have a website. It's RebeccaWildbear.com. So www.RebeccaWildbear.com. So I guess that would be the best place to go. For Animas Valley Institute work, you could go on their website at animas.org and see what I'm offering through them. My website links to theirs. So I do programs with wild yoga, and those are listed on my website, and the Animas programs are listed on their website.
Great. You got any retreats or quests coming up this summer?
Yep, I have a lot of programs coming up this summer, and they're the ones I'm doing for Animas. A number of them for 2023 are listed. The ones in fall aren't quite up, I think, but most of them are up. And with my own wild yoga programs, I'm just in the process of putting them up on my website in the next week or maybe two. But I'm about to do some online offerings. I'm going to have an online offering, like an online class on each of the chapters in the book. And so we're going to take it slowly. It'll be like a once a week kind of class, and then with one individual session. So you don't have to do all the chapters in the book. You can pick whichever chapter, if there's a chapter you really want to focus on, and just do that one. And so this year, I'll probably only get to the first 4 chapters or so. And then after that, we'll be taking our time, making our way through the book. And I also am doing some in-person wild yoga programs up in the New England area in the fall and in Costa Rica in the winter. And in 2024, I'm trying to consider what else, other ones I might do. There's a lot of options, maybe another one on the river or something like that.
Sounds good. Staying busy serving soul. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks again, Rebecca. And maybe we'll see you down the road.
Thank you. That sounds great. I appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.